Hi, it's Stu, and this is my week of reading in review. Last week, I made a reading challenge to read only hardbacks and to read through the decades starting the 1990s. In this challenge, there were 4 hardback books, one from the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s. My fifth book, as I normally read around 5 books a week, more or less, was a wild card, and I just picked a lovely what seemed like cozy palette cleansing hardback that I thought that I would really enjoy to end out the week. So the first book I read was The Itch, and I had predicted that this was going to be a fun page turner about coming of age. Well, the characters in this book are in their 30s, entering their 40s, and in some ways, to me, that's a kind of coming of age as well, but certainly not the kind of coming of age that how we classically think of it. That being said, this book is very much about discovery of self, but also has themes of friendship and marriage, love. Right? The 2 main characters are friends throughout their lives and are what we might call unlucky in love. This book also explores, it's a contemporary fiction from the 1990s and explores, it was very relevant for the time and also still today. It explores a little bit about Black producers and writers and scriptwriters trying to break into Hollywood and have their stories told in authentic ways. And it also just explores the expectations of others, the dreams one has for themselves, and how that kind of shakes out. I thought this was a fun read. It was definitely the pacing was quick, so it was a page turner, and I would recommend this book to almost anyone that just enjoys reading. I think that this was a very accessible book that wasn't fluffy in any way, but didn't have any sort of reading barriers or complications or nuances that wouldn't make it a highly recommendable book. The Itch. The second book that I read this week was Henning Mankel's Kennedy's Brain. I predicted that this was going to be a mystery or thriller. I wasn't wrong. It was a mystery thriller. It had 3 parts, and kind of like the 3 acts we're used to in cinema. And in fact, the first part of the book really encaptured me. I very much appreciated the writing style. I liked the development of the main character, the protagonist, who's a Swedish woman who's an archaeologist working in Greece, who then returns to Sweden to discover the untimely passing of her son. I really appreciated how this discovery was developed in the book, and how it made her, how her reaction was explored in the book. And then in part 2, maybe the end of part 1, in part 3, there became some sort of plot holes. And while this book, I believe, was written to really interrogate and explore human rights violations, humanity, and the consequences of the long-term consequences of colonization, and the mindset that had to happen to even allow for how colonization, settler colonization, and any kind of resource exploitation, human exploitation, happened throughout history, and how it's still reverberating into today's society. And I think that it's very clear to me that these are topics that are very dear to this author, and I appreciated very much the introspection into them. That being said, it almost felt like the plot was kind of shoved into that those ideas, the idea of creating that dialogue or introspection. And for that, I think the book became a little bit harder for me to enjoy, or its readability went down in the second and certainly the third act. I saw another book by this author in a little free library, which is on the way to a park where I often walk, and the sun is shining these days. So I'll stop by with this book and see if that Henning Mankell is still there, and if it is, then I'll trade up, because I'm definitely willing to give this author another try, just to see how another one of his mysteries or suspense play out. The next book I read was really, although it had 3 parts, such as Kennedy's Brain, it was a just completely different kind of read, and I deeply appreciated this week that there was a lot of diversity in writing styles and narrative styles, and even in sort of the content, the themes and the explorations inside of the books themselves. This book was The Study of Animal Languages, and I was kind of geeking out about it because I am a language person, and I projected that it was going to be about communication and language. I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't really right. The first act, this book actually had a kind of the opposite of Kennedy's Brain with me, is that the first part was a little bit harder for me to get into, where I did appreciate the introduction of mental illness is a topic that this book was going to explore, which made me compelled as a reader to discover how it was going to be explored in this book, but also how the narrator protagonist experienced the world around him and noticed sort of all the little things going on around while the bigger drama unfolded. This book grew on me. I found the first part a little pretentious academia, which wasn't necessarily off-putting. It was just harder to get into. But as it developed, the plot really started developing. The characters really started, we got more scenarios with them. And I really started to enjoy this book. Well, this book certainly is about communication in marriage, and shines a light on that, of course, in order to get through all of the demands of perhaps a partnership like marriage, one has to have impeccable communication. I think this is really more about the demands of life and how, which then translate into the demands of a partnership. So there's a lot of like expectations of where your life is going to be, and or hopes and dreams being realized or being let go, and what it means to support and hold each other up, and or just how hard it is to juggle life, family, career, and all of the things that we try to manage in our lives. There's a certain audience I would definitely recommend this book to. I am actually putting it back in a little free library because there's no one who is around me currently who I think would love this book. However, there are people who live far from me who I will just send a little note that I read this book, and if you're at a public library or at a bookshop, grab it, you might like it. The book from the 2020s, which is the most recent publication, and it was published in 2024, is Come and Get It by Kiley Reid. And I had a lot of fun with this book in the TBR video, but also with friends, just kind of looking at the cover and contemplating what in the world could this book be about. A title like Come and Get It really drew me in, and of course these color choices, and what in the heck is this pig about, right? I think I mentioned it in the TBR video. I saw it in the little free library closest to my house and said, "Yep, that's for me." And sometimes when it's completely experimental, I didn't know anything about this book or author, you have to say, okay, this is a big book. This is going to be a bigger book. This is going to be a bigger commitment, but it really wasn't. The book covered a lot, and I think that's part of its intrigue, but maybe part of it making it less readable but I think for me at the beginning of the book, it seemed to be about nothing. Well, I have to say, as a sidebar, I don't believe any book is about nothing. But when I start to feel like this book is about nothing, I kind of, as a reader, stop and say, okay, one or two things could be happening right here. I need to really start paying attention to the nuances and the details and get myself inside of this story so that I can try to really understand them, and or I need to just be patient and realize that these little pieces might not make sense as the little pieces, but in the big picture, it's going to be a book about something, a big something rather than little nothings. I think both could be said about this book. I think the most compelling part of this book to me was the sort of exploration of microaggressions. And if you don't experience microaggressions, I can imagine that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on the somewhat implicitly described and somewhat explicitly described microaggressions. This book is also about people coming together with different backgrounds and trying to live their lives in close proximity, trying to develop friendships or cohabitation relationships or relationships, right? They're looking at kind of all of the different ways we come together as humans. This book also explores sexuality, and this book also sort of, again, explores to what are your hopes and dreams and how are you kind of getting there? What do you do about the wins and what do you do about the disappointments? Who lifts you up and who brings you down? I think this was such a great read, and I really enjoyed this book. In the end of it, I found it quite easy to read once I got into it and really started appreciating some of the narrative decisions and styles of this author that took me a little while to get there, but absolutely hit hard in the end. I think that this book isn't for everybody like the last one, but the people who would really love this book, the audience of this book would really love this book as I did, and I'm going to put it back into a little free library. But I have a couple people in mind I would definitely recommend this book to. Final note is on the cover of this author, Kiley Reid, has another book called Such a Fun Age. And if I were to see that book, and I believe those are the only two thus far, as this is a very recent publication, if I were to see this book, Such a Fun Age, then I would take the opportunity of getting it. I'm definitely interested in reading the other work of this author. Finally was the little, and I call it little because it's little. I mean, I'm literally just talking about the kind of size of this book, which appealed to me. And I called it sort of my wild card palette cleanser. I didn't know what I was getting into, especially with this. Well, really much with any of the books. I don't do any kind of like really looking up. I might read the synopsis and some of the reviews, but sometimes that can be quite misleading. And I try not to think too much about it, like from the preview. I like to really just give books a chance without reading anyone's reviews or going too deep into what the book is about or what heavy themes they cover, etc. So I didn't know what I was getting into, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to have either a children's middle grade book, or just something cozy for the end of the week. And this book really appealed to me. The cover felt cozy and precious. The title is raised, so there's some texture on on this cover. It's the title and the author. And this book was 5 interconnected short stories written in chapters, each of which explore different characters who go into a community center where there's a little library, and there's a beloved librarian who's very insightful, who gives them a little felt gift that she has made herself, and book suggestions to go maybe it's the other way around, book suggestions and then a little felt gift that she's made, which will symbolize something meaningful to these characters as the story develops. This book is very much about finding out what's making you feel less fulfilled and satisfied, or what narratives you're telling yourself, as this is a book about stories, and then finding a way to find another narrative. It's very heartwarming. This book I would describe as heartwarming, and the lessons are simple and in your face. They're explicit and really revolve around changing your narrative or changing your mindset, and then letting your actions follow, as a way to find joy and fulfillment and delight in your everyday life. I would say that this book isn't for everybody, but I can't imagine it not being for every reader ever. I think maybe some people who want things less subtle, want more depth and more less explicit, like little lessons, perhaps might be less compelled to this book. But I generally just thought this book was everything that I wanted and needed it to be, which was cozy, heartwarming, uplifting, and I'm even going to use the word sweet in a way that I hope is not condescending towards this author's amazing work. That book, because it is so beautiful, the actual cover is going to a friend of mine who, the minute I showed it to her, she said, "Oh, can I have that book?" And the answer, of course, is yes. S.I. Unhall, 100%. It's not the weekend yet. It's just the beginning of the weekend. So I had to make a decision around, am I going to just start next week's reading goals, do a TBR for next week and kick it off? Am I going to just take a few days off reading? Or am I just going to kind of pull a couple more books the weekend, sort of to have a weekend TBR? I decided the latter. And just a few thoughts around how I made these decisions. I know what I'm going to do for this coming week's TBR. Women's History Month is about to kick off, and so I'm going to read all women authors with a caveat, which will be explained in that video. But as I was thinking around the concept of these months assigned to identities, and really exploring the voices, the narratives, the perspectives, and the histories of diverse demographics and identity groups, I thought that I would honor the month that we're leaving by reading a classic. To honor the departing out of Black History Month, and to honor that Black history is American history, every month of the year, I am going to read, well, I've already started, to be honest. Their Eyes Were Watching God. It was a book that I picked up at a charity shop because it's something I really wanted to read, and it's a small but classic read, so I'm excited for this. And then finally, I think I'll have more time, and if not, that's okay. I'll reshelf it, or I'll start my next week's TBR later. It's okay, to honor the beginning of Ramadan. I'm actually really excited about this book. It came out of a book box, but I've heard a few things about it since I've been talking books with a lot of folks. The Bad Muslim Discount. I've heard that it's a really great read, and I think that will be the end of my weekend before I roll over into my next week's 5-book selection for the weekend reading TBR.